The next item of business is a debate on motion 19802 in the name of Ivan McKee on Community Wealth Building Scotland Bill. I'd invite members wishing to take part in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Ivan McKee to speak to and move the motion. Minister, around 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to begin by thanking the Economy and Fair Work Committee for its constructive Stage 1 report on the Community Wealth Building Scotland Bill. I welcome the support expressed by the committee for the general principles of the bill and the observation that it has the potential to play a vital role in improving the lives of the people across Scotland. The bill's central aim is to create a new, consistent platform for local economic development in Scotland, a new format that recognises the economic agency of every pound of public money, alongside the necessity for the public sector to partner with businesses and with communities in pursuit of sustainable economic growth. When I assumed responsibility for the bill, I was keen to ensure that this legislation aimed at adding value to economic policy objectives also worked as a public service reform measure. And I'd like to pay tribute to Tom Arthur for the work he has done on this bill previously and his commitment to the principles of community wealth building. Any government must be thoughtful when seeking to make changes to the public sector partnership landscape through legislation. However, I think community wealth building's focus on growing all forms of local businesses, creating and protecting jobs, extending greater ownership and influence to communities, and looking to attract more investment into our local economies can improve the outcomes we achieve from economic development activity. The bill obliges future Scottish Governments to publish a community wealth building statement. The statement will set out the measures and actions that will be taken to advance community wealth building in Scotland across the 5 pillars of this economic development model around spending and procurement, fair work and employment, assets, land and property, new business growth and investment. Indeed.
Fraser.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. As he mentioned procurement, I wonder if he agrees with the comments from the Federation of Small Business, who have stated that in order for this bill to be effective, there should be targets put in the community wealth building plans for each public body and local authority, targets for the amount of public spend to be spent in local economies.
I'm Mickey and give you the time.
Indeed, it's a very fair question. The member will know that I've had extensive engagement with the FSB on this issue, and I've met with them face-to-face to talk through their proposals on the more general issue of procurement that I know they're very interested in, and thresholds. We are taking that work forward through a separate consultation. It's been launched. On the issue of targets, our perspective on that as government is that those targets are best set locally, not least because each local area will have a very different dynamic round about what they want to include, largely due to the size of the local area. Smaller local authority areas will have less scope for procuring within that local authority area than others will. So we think those targets are best set centrally, but the guidance that we will bring forward will indicate that local authorities and community wealth building partnerships should seek to include those local targets as appropriate.
Michelle Thompson.
Intervention, and I respect what he's saying about setting these targets locally, but in terms of discussions with local authorities, I wonder if he would be prepared to also press them that when they collect their data, they disaggregate it into women-led businesses as well, because this is an area of oversight we're still struggling to get, given the amount of capital that goes to women-led businesses.
Minister.
Member raised a very valuable point, and obviously we've got Accelerate Her in the Parliament this week, highlighting the challenges that women-owned businesses face in terms of securing funding. So we will set out the guidelines for the targets that should be collected by local authorities, and I think this will be a consideration as we work through that process. After the first statement from the Government on community wealth building, an updated statement would be required within the subsequent 5-year period, with a progress report published after each 5-year period. The statement and statutory guidance will assist local authority-led partnerships to produce their own community wealth building action plans, and these plans must be produced within 3 years should the bill pass, and they would be reviewed every 5 years. The bill has been informed by the desire to enable democratically elected local government to lead a process of active reform and improvement without creating a complex attendant bureaucracy. Local authorities will sit at the centre of a core partnership of relevant public sector anchor bodies, and they would be partnered by our enterprise agencies, health boards, colleges and regional transport partnerships, in other words, the relevant bodies identified in the bill. Among the many important recommendations in the committee's Stage 1 report was the call for clear guidance to help community wealth building partnerships develop plans and implement actions in concert, and I have replied to the convener of the Economy and Fair Work Committee a detailed response to their report indeed.
Sarah Boyle.
Can I thank the Minister for taking an intervention? Community Land Scotland have also suggested that we should think about including Scottish National Investment Bank, National Park Authorities, Forestry Land Scotland and Crown Estate Scotland, given the role of their influence and ownership of land holdings. And would that be something the Minister would look at to enable new opportunities for community wealth building and ownership?
Minister.
It's really important to recognise that all of those bodies are already involved in the process as specified bodies, and it's important we get the right proportionate impact here so that the plans can be pulled together effectively in a way that's most impactful. But it's absolutely true to say that all of those bodies are already included as specified bodies, and I think that's a proportionate way to proceed. So community wealth building will absolutely be part of the work that they will be required to do, and they will have an input to this process. But I think it's important to recognise which bodies are most central to this process, so as we get the most effective impact. So in my response to the committee, I've set out plans to conduct an inclusive and collaborative development process with regard to the guidance, and my aim is to start that discussion as soon as possible. And clear guidance informed by successful practice is clear, but too high a level of prescription in practice is not desirable. The majority of our local authorities are already pursuing community wealth building policy and objectives, and I'm confident that this approach, built on collaboration and empowerment, has the best chance of success. To reflect the fact that some local authorities will want to work together, the bill makes provision for neighbouring councils to work on a regional basis, and I think this provides flexibility at a local level for community wealth building partnerships. And whatever the pattern of uptake in this context, all community wealth building partnerships would be expected to set plans that are complementary to existing objectives to revive local economies and empower local communities. I just want to touch briefly on some points raised by the committee's report. First of all, to recognise community wealth building as a place-focused economic development model spanning a number of relevant policy areas. And the aim of the bill is to create a foundation for a consistent and progressive approach to local and regional economic development. And as it beds in, it will become a new and vital place for dialogue and changes required in law across a wide range of policy areas. The second area I think is crucial is the involvement and empowerment of communities, and it's important that the community wealth building is a signal that our communities must be connected to activities involving councils and others with themselves being supported to lead economic activity. And the third relates to finance, and the financial memorandum accompanying the bill was informed by real cost information gleaned from local authorities and other public bodies. The figures highlight the costs of administration, and it's right that these estimates are scrutinised. But I think that they set a realistic picture of the cost of implementation. I know that some stakeholders raised the issue of wider implementation costs, and while this is a valid point in the broader context, given the wide scope of community wealth building, I think that involves consideration of the deployment of funds across a range of contributory policy areas, which will be determined in regards to those specific future policy interventions. The next Scottish Government and subsequent administrations will be tasked with considering how all relevant government activities contribute to community wealth building, whether directly in areas such as procurement or fair work and skills, or in a wider range of policy areas where public investment or regulation might flex and change to assist our economy to grow in a way that is successful, sustainable and fair. I look forward to working with the committee and members on the next legislative stage, and I invite members to work with me on that. Presiding Officer, I move the amendment in my name that the Parliament agrees to the general principles of the Community Wealth Building Scotland Bill.
Thank you, Minister. Just a further reminder to members wishing to participate in the debate to make sure that they have their request to speak buttons pressed. And I call on Daniel Johnson on behalf of the Economy and Fair Work Committee. Around 7 minutes, Mr Johnson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to speak on behalf of the Economy and Fair Work Committee during the Stage 1 debate on the Community Wealth Building Scotland Bill. And can I apologise for not being there in person? Can I also acknowledge receipt of the letter from the Minister, as previously mentioned, which we received this afternoon. I'd like to begin by thanking everyone who responded to our call for views and the witnesses who gave evidence during our Stage 1 scrutiny. I'd also like to extend my thanks to those who enabled our visits to Alloa and Irvine, which provided invaluable local and practical insights. I'd also like to acknowledge the previous work by the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee, on whose work we also relied. Community wealth building is a proven economic development tool that aims to retain wealth within local communities, foster engagement and cohesion, and ultimately enrich the lives of residents. And as the committee heard, many local authorities across Scotland have already begun implementing such community wealth building measures, either on their own account or as part of the Scottish Government's pilot. The bill seeks to formalise this approach, ensuring adoption of community wealth building as a model of economic development across the country. As members will have seen from our report, the Economy and Fair Work Committee is supportive of this general aim. However, the committee heard from some who felt that the legislation may not be necessary to achieve the aims as contained within the bill, and that alternative measures such as ministerial guidance or direction could be used to achieve the same aims, or indeed that there was the possibility of new powers, additional metrics, which could have been used to strengthen the aims of the bill. The committee did hear from those, including Neil McEnroy, chair of EDAS, that a legislative approach such as Kingdom Bill contains a clear obligation to act and ensures the involvement from across the public sector, and therefore was of benefit. Generally, the committee is supportive of the measure of the bill, but there are some areas that we believe that could be strengthened and extended. The publication of our community wealth building statement and the establishment of partnerships by the Scottish Government are welcome steps, but only part of the solution. Throughout our evidence gathering, the importance of clear, detailed and practical guidance under Section 9 of the bill was repeatedly emphasised. To ensure consistent adoption, guidance must help local authorities and partnerships understand both the objectives and the means of achieving them. Crucially, the guidance must address capacity challenges within local authorities, partner organisations and community groups. As Matt Pearce from DTAS warned, without this support, community wealth building risks becoming a burdensome and disengaging process. Accordingly, the guidance must set out clear expectations, particularly around governance, coordination, monitoring and evaluation mechanisms encompassing public, private, third sector and, most importantly, local communities. To realise the full potential of community wealth building action plans, it is essential that local authorities and their partners are properly resourced to do so. Many witnesses expressed concern about the capacity of organisations who are already under great financial pressure to engage in the development and delivery of these plans. The City of Edinburgh Council told us that the financial memorandum presents an incomplete picture of the resources required. COSLA echoed this concern, warning that without proper funding, action plans risk becoming tick-box exercises. The bill has triggered a financial resolution acknowledging the significant expenditure involved, and we note the Minister's suggestion that some resources could be drawn from existing budgets. But the committee remains concerned that without additional support and consideration of the total additional effort that this legislation may require, the result may mean inconsistent or limited delivery. Although the community lies at the heart of the concept of community wealth building, the bill makes no reference to the community groups, third sector or private sectors within the partnerships. This omission was highlighted by many witnesses and respondents to our call for views. Witnesses, including the Scottish Community Alliance, called for the bill to formally recognise third sector and community groups as being essential to delivery. The committee also received evidence regarding the need for mechanisms to enable direct citizen involvement within the development of community wealth building plans and approaches. The committee therefore recommends that guidance produced under the bill should set out a clear expectation for local authorities and partnerships to engage with the third sector and urge the government to undertake further work on developing practical approaches for citizen engagement. I'd also note that the committee raised the question about the rationale for the selection of the specified bodies that are required to be consulted. In our report, we highlighted suggestions from witnesses and stakeholders for additional bodies that could usefully be included within this list. The bill does not specify how the impact of community wealth building action plans will be measured, leaving this to local authorities and their partners, as noted in the intervention undertaken by the Minister. Witnesses emphasised the need for consistent high-quality data, warning that without it, progress cannot be accurately assessed. And what I'd emphasise here is it's not simply about the targets, but actually having consistent metrics, with the targets themselves being set within the partnerships, but having consistent metrics will allow comparison across community wealth building plans. The FSB highlighted the importance of standardised report, as noted, and I think particularly measuring the value created for local SMEs is critical to understanding how well community wealth building is being delivered. To support consistency in the sharing of best practice, the committee recommends a set of core common metrics to be agreed with COSLA, and that these should sit alongside area-specific goals, allowing flexibility while enabling meaningful comparison. In addition to our recommendations for improving the bill itself, the committee heard that complementary reforms in other policy areas are essential to maximise the impact of the legislation. Stakeholders consistently highlighted that procurement reform is key to enabling community wealth building. Proposals included lowering the threshold for mandatory consideration of community benefits, raising the threshold for regulated procurements and allowing direct awards to local suppliers where community benefits are evident, prioritising social value in procurement scoring, and standardising procurement reporting, particularly in relation to SMEs. There were also calls to expand the definition of supported businesses, to allow public bodies to restrict tenders by geography or company size, to streamline the asset transfer process and indeed review the Community Empowerment Act, and to strengthen powers of compulsory purchase and perhaps examine the possibility of the introduction of compulsory sale orders. In conclusion, with the right support and complementary reforms, this bill has the potential to significantly improve the lives of people and communities across Scotland. The Economy and Fair Work Committee supports the general principles of the bill and looks forward to receiving further detail from the Scottish Government ahead of stages 2 and 3, should the Parliament approve the bill at decision time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. I now call on Murdo Fraser, around 6 minutes. Mr Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by echoing the thanks of the committee convener to all those who gave evidence to the committee in relation to our Stage 1 scrutiny, to our clerking team, to SPICE, and to my fellow committee members with whom we worked, I think, on a mostly consensual basis in agreeing a unanimous report, which I would commend to the Chamber. And the first question that we have to address when looking at this bill is this: what is community wealth building? Because it's one of those terms, a bit like the term well-being economy, which is banded around quite a lot, but not easily understood. And the committee's report attempts to answer this question, because what community wealth building seeks to do is utilise the economic impact of anchor organisations, which can be public, private or third sector, to stimulate and retain economic activity in a local area. And as the Minister outlined, there are 5 pillars to community wealth building: spending, maximising the benefits of public procurement; workforce, increasing fair work and skills development opportunities; land and property, ensuring that these are used to benefit communities, SMEs and the environment; inclusive ownership; and finance. So, for example, community wealth building is about better using the vast sums spent by public bodies to support more local businesses and employ local people, and to ensure that derelict properties are brought back into productive use. Yep. And with that definition, I think we can all conclude that community wealth building is a good thing, regardless of our different political perspectives. Indeed, there is already good work going on building and developing community wealth building in different parts of Scotland by local authorities and others, as the committee heard in its evidence. So that takes us to the second question, Presiding Officer. What is the point of this bill and what does it achieve? Well, at one level, the answer to that question has to be not a great deal. Because essentially what it does is require Scottish ministers to prepare a national statement setting out the actions they will take to reduce economic inequality and support economic growth by ensuring wealth is generated and retained in local and regional areas. And secondly, public bodies, including local authorities, have to produce and implement community wealth building plans. Now, Presiding Officer, that is fine as far as it goes, but it is obvious already that this bill may actually deliver very little in terms of practical outcomes. And as the committee noted, the bill's aims could potentially be delivered through non-legislative means without the necessity for a bill at all, because much of this is already in the power of the Scottish Government. Moreover, the relevant public bodies listed in this bill is a relatively short list. And there are very key public bodies not included, for example, large landowners such as Forestry and Land Scotland, the Crown Estate in Scotland, ferry operators, Marine Scotland, ScotRail and the Scottish National Investment Bank. The Scottish Conservatives will support the bill at stage 1 because it is a useful step in the right direction. But our concern is that without more concrete provisions, we are unlikely to see much progress being made. So let me give some examples of how the bill might be improved. The Federation of Small Business have stated that, while they are supportive of community wealth building as a concept, the bill should include statutory targets for procurement spending with local and small firms and standardised rules for reporting on that spend. The FSB Head of Policy and External Affairs warns, without clear benchmarks and transparency, there is a real risk that the bill won't deliver the change that towns, villages and local businesses expect. Yes, of course.
Minister. Just on that specific target point, and I've addressed that in my opening remarks, I'd be interested to get from the member how he envisages that would operate and how you would set those targets, given the very significant variation across the 32 local authorities in Scotland in terms of their economic base, their size, their scale, etc. etc.
Murdo Fraser.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for that intervention. That's something we can explore, I think, as the bill progresses. The one thing I would say very clearly is I'm not proposing a top-down approach to the setting of targets, because I entirely understand the point the Minister is making, where these need to be set on a local level and, crucially, set in consultation with stakeholders, including, of course, the business community. But I think it's important that these local plans, when they're drawn up, do include targets, so there is some ambition baked into them. The FSB quote research showing nearly 3/4 of small businesses who bid for public contracts find that process complex and challenging. And that needs to change if we want to see the benefits of public sector spend supporting local businesses. Another point made in evidence to the committee was that community voices have to be engaged when local action plans are being devised. So we need to see communities, and that includes the local business community, being consulted and engaged. And it's also important that unrepresentative bodies and voices are not allowed to dominate discussions. And then, Presiding Officer, there is the question of resources. Some witnesses told the committee that they have issues with a lack of estimates for the implementation costs of these action plans. There will be a resourcing issue for local authorities and other public bodies in drawing up these plans, and those resources might be spent on actual delivery of measures rather than bureaucracy. The Minister giving evidence to the committee acknowledged that the financial memorandum does not include the cost of implementation of these action plans. It is unclear at present what that cost would be or where those resources would come from. And without resources in place, the requirement to implement action plans may not be deliverable. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, this bill will achieve very little in itself. It will require resources to produce and deliver action plans, and unless we see implementation of what is in them, that will make very little difference. So if we want to see proper community wealth building, this is only a first step, and much more needs to be done if the promised benefits are to be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Fraser. I now call Richard Leonard again. Around 5 minutes, Mr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I remind members of my voluntary register of interests? What this community wealth building bill could be about is direct action, new statutory powers, not just words but deeds. It could rekindle the radical tradition which dates all the way back to Robert Owen and the Fenwick Weavers. It could put forward a vision of hope, Scotland as a centre for cooperative development, a Mondragon of the North, a new era of economic democracy. It could be providing the leadership for a genuinely democratic green industrial revolution, one which is not wholly dependent, as this government would have it, on foreign direct investment. Our energy resources and our new industries once again colonised by private interest, which is a policy courted, incentivised and boasted of by the SNP, with the result that Scotland is turning more and more into a branch economy. This bill could be properly resourcing, revamping and placing on a statutory footing Cooperative Development Scotland, arming it with the instruments of investment that it demands, the technical assistance and expertise that it needs, and giving it new legal powers to intervene in the economy through an Industrial Reform and Common Ownership Act, a Marcora law for Scotland, to give workers a new legal right to buy an enterprise when it is put up for sale or even facing closure, a bill which could give them the power to appoint a financing member to assist in such a buyout, the power to place a duty on employers to advance contractual redundancy entitlements to co-invest to help self-fund that buyout, underpinned by tax incentives like non-domestic rates relief, where there is a cooperative conversion, land and buildings transaction tax exemption, underpinned as well by progressive procurement policies like reserved contract status for cooperative, inclusive and democratic business models by amending Section 11 and Regulation 21 of the 2014 Public Procurement Act. At the same time, this bill could usher in an action plan to start insourcing services which the Scottish Government currently outsources, like the much criticised prisoner escort service, and the insourcing as well of all that public money wasted on management consultants, by simply drawing on the expertise instead of the workers who are delivering the services. I have often thought that if the government had listened to the workforce at Ferguson Marine, instead of hiring highly paid turnaround directors, rear admirals and naval commodores and international management consultants, that these ferries would have been in the service of our island communities years ago. We should stop seeing trade unions simply as a last line of defence for working people. They should be seen as an alternative line of advance for working people, through which workers can participate in the running of our public services, like water, like the railways, like the National Health Service, like local government services. Yes.
Stephen Kerr.
In his speech, will he have a kind word to say about small and medium-sized businesses and the opportunities that they currently feel denied of when it comes to public sector procurement?
Richard Leonard.
I've got 5 minutes, so I'll devote my speech to what I think is important, and Stephen Kerr can devote his speech to what he thinks is important. This community wealth building bill could be about democratising organisations like Scottish Water, so that we avoid a repeat of the industrial relations debacle which we have witnessed in recent years, where excessive executive bonuses signed off by ministers are the norm, while workers' wages are constrained. If this bill is to become serious about building a strong and resilient economy, it must become far more radical and far more progressive. We should be asking questions like, why on earth shouldn't those who create the wealth own the wealth that they create? Why shouldn't we have a system of economic governance based on one member, one vote, instead of one share, one vote? Why shouldn't we foster an economy where labour hires capital instead of capital hiring labour? Where is the courage? Where is the conviction? Where is the vision in this bill? Shifting the balance of power in Scotland should not simply be a piecemeal and an occasional part of what this Parliament is about. It ought to be its very essence. Instead, what this bill offers is an instruction to others, to local government, to regional transport partnerships, to health boards, to colleges, to enterprise agencies, to come up with action plans, while the government simply has to issue a statement every 5 years. Instead of closed horizons like this, we should be opening them up. So Labour will support the principles of the bill tonight, but we will be pursuing radical, progressive, socialistic amendments.
Thank you, Mr Leonard. I now call Lorna Slater. Around 4 minutes. Ms Slater.
It's fair to say that at the committee session where this bill was presented to us, the response from the Committee for Economy and Fair Work was pretty nonplussed. This bill doesn't actually have in it any of the significant changes in powers that can only be provided by legislation. Improvements to the compulsory sales order system, a compulsory purchase order system, changes of powers to local authorities so that they can legally procure what they need locally. These things all still need doing, and I'm disappointed that the Scottish Government didn't take this opportunity to do them. However, we are debating the bill in front of us rather than the bill we wish we had. In present drafting, the bill sets out an intention in legislation. It isn't totally clear this couldn't be done without legislation, but this is at least an alignment of policy intention in the right direction, even if it isn't yet much of a step forward. I am somewhat concerned at the outset that there is not a wide understanding in government and public sector about what community wealth building is. When I asked Adrian Gillespie, CEO of Scottish Enterprise, at committee in September, what role should Scottish Enterprise have in community wealth building, his response was, the major contribution that we make to community wealth building is creating and protecting high-value jobs, which is an excellent goal and an important outcome, but it is absolutely not community wealth building if these high-value jobs are for companies that are owned by private interests who own the assets and keep the profits. That is company owners and shareholders building wealth for themselves, which is fine. I actually don't have an issue with private profit, provided it pays its taxes, doesn't pollute the environment, and treats people fairly. But it is the exact opposite of community wealth building. In his defence, Adrian Gillespie did go on to talk about fair work and community regeneration and placemaking, which are elements of community wealth building. A good description of what community wealth building is handily on the front page of the bill, facilitating and supporting the generation, circulation and retention of wealth in local and regional economies. That means that assets are owned locally and by communities, and that the benefits, including profits, are retained locally and by the community. What this bill needs to do is make sure that more money, including public money, can be and is spent locally, which means removing the legislative and other barriers that prevent local authorities from buying locally. Cheapest isn't always best. Councils and public bodies need to be empowered to choose local business, cooperative businesses, social enterprises and small businesses when they buy goods and services. What this bill needs to do is ensure that public assets are optimised for public good. For example, that local authorities are supported to turn buildings and facilities they don't need anymore into places that support their community, whether by housing charities and social enterprises, small businesses, or community centres where people can meet, learn and connect, rather than being sold or rented to the highest bidder or left empty. What this bill needs to do is ensure that more assets are owned by communities and that the profits and benefits of those assets are kept locally, whether that is a community-owned energy scheme where the profits are spent on local infrastructure, or community woodlands that are maintained for the use and benefit of the people who live there. The Scottish Greens support the principle of this bill, but we'd like to see a lot more in it.
Thank you. I now call Jamie Green. Similarly, around 4 minutes, Mr Green.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. We've had some very passionate, if a little predictable, speeches so far with people nailing their political flags to the pole. You'd think there was an election round the corner, wouldn't you? But there's one thing I think there should be consensus on, and that's that economic growth has to be the #1 priority of the next Scottish Government, whoever it is and whatever it looks like. Because if that's not its ambition, then Scotland has a problem. Indeed, this Parliament has a problem. We have to drive up wages. We have to achieve maximum employment in the country. We have to make Scotland an attractive place for people to come and work and live, and importantly, stay if they're already here. We have to give every young person across the country the opportunity to work and live in their own community without the need to leave their own town or even the country itself. Because that buoyant economy is what will give the next government the money it needs to fund good public services. But this bill, I think, given what I've already heard and what I read in the Stage 1 report, is left wanting. I don't think it sufficiently will help meet any of these ambitions in a meaningful way. I also have to question why, with just 4 months left to dissolution, we have a bill like this rearing its head at Stage 1. Is there a need for this bill at all? What is in the bill that the government cannot already do? And that's been entirely unclear to me from the evidence that the committee took. And equally, the only duty, as Richard Leonard rightly said, the government has to do is simply come up to the Parliament once every 5 years and make a statement about what it thinks other people have or haven't done. Whereas the duty on the government to deliver community wealth, it's simply not there in the bill. But nonetheless, if there is to be such a statement, then here's what's not in it but should be. And I've got a list. There should be an update on new organisations, which are considered these so-called anchor organisations. There should be an assessment about the impact of new and emerging technologies on our economy and our job market, including the challenges and opportunities that presents us as a country. It should be identifying specific locations, towns, areas and regions, or even industries that the government believes will require additional support from its anchor organisations. But more importantly, and this is what's missing, where I do agree with Murdo Fraser, is it needs statutory targets to ensure that the bill achieves any of its objectives, because otherwise it's just a bill with lots of worthy words on paper, but will result in absolutely no meaningful action. And these are amendments that I hope are forthcoming, because if they don't appear from others, I'll certainly be submitting them. The bill must recognise the full potential of community wealth building, because look at the example of Preston, which the committee took evidence on. That model saw £200 million invested back into the local economy. That area halved its unemployment rate, and it saw its local authority remove itself from the 20% most deprived area of the UK. And I'm not saying community wealth building was the only metric to do that, but it unlocked something very important that we've never been able to unlock in this country, and that's procurement. Local public procurement. We have failed as a country to do that for many years. And I also am concerned that by simply putting all the onus on people like local councils specifically, who already are facing a £5 billion black hole in their finances by the end of this decade, it's simply going to become a tick-box exercise for councils rather than letting them turn their attention to the real crisis that they have. I wish I had time, but unfortunately I've got 30 seconds left, unless I get some time back. In that case, yes, of course.
The point that Jamie Green makes on us not delivering on procurement. If I told them that across in the UK, the average percentage of spend that goes to small and medium-sized enterprise is 20%, what does he think the percentage is in Scotland?
Jamie Green.
Are you answering a question or asking a question? My question to the government is, what more is the government doing to ensure that local procurement is easy? We've already heard evidence directly. There's nobody in this room could think that it's easy for a small business to get some of these contracts with the NHS or Education Scotland or Transport Scotland. We all know small businesses in our local community that are struggling to get spend from public procurement. I hope the answer is way more than 20%, but it should be neither 70, 80 or 90, and if it's up there, I'll be really happy. Feel free to answer that.
Minister.
The answer is 47%, which is actually a higher percentage than small and medium-sized enterprises are of the whole economy. So small and medium-sized enterprises get more of their work proportionally from the public sector than bigger enterprises do, and that they get from private sector contractors.
Jamie Green.
Well, that's great. So let's do more of it. Let's make sure that more local businesses in our own communities, because that's what community wealth building is. It's building wealth in our local communities, ensuring that SMEs in our own backyards are able to compete for some of this and take out some of that horrendous red tape that they face for too many years. We must do better, and I'm glad the Minister agrees that we're on the right path there. I'll simply conclude by saying that we won't stand in the way of the bill, as others will not. But I don't want to see a bill for bill's sake at the end of this process. It must be meaningful, and it must actually deliver its intended purpose in improving the wealth of our communities across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Green. We now move to the open debate. I call Kevin Stewart to be followed by Maurice Golden. Around 4 minutes. Mr Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm enjoying the debate thus far. I think Richard Leonard may have surprised Anna Sarwar and Keir Starmer about his socialistic approach, because it's been sadly lacking of late in the Labour Party. But this, Presiding Officer, is more than just a piece of legislation. It is a commitment to transforming our local economies and creating a Scotland where economic success is genuinely shared by everyone in every place. And I do think, like others who have contributed thus far, that we need to build on what is already there. Like Lorna Slater, I would like to see moves forward in terms of compulsory sale orders. We've already seen changes to compulsory purchase orders, which I put through. I think there's still more to do there. And beyond that, we have got to get procurement aspects right. I note that Elena Whittam is to the right of me, and one of the companies that benefited locally in her area, Moss Gill Dairies, lost a contract recently, which I think is to the detriment of all. And I think that these kind of things must be resolved. Community wealth building is fundamentally about making those economies work for our people and our communities. It is about addressing economic and wealth inequality by actively supporting the generation, circulation and retention of wealth in our local and regional economies. And the principle behind community wealth building is sound. It is nothing more than increasing the velocity of money at a local level, and the concept of the velocity of money is brutally simple. The more hands that a pound spent by government or public sector passes through, the better. In the worst-case scenario, a pound spent at a large multinational company doesn't circulate in Scotland at all, but simply goes back to their HQ in London. But in the best-case scenario, that same pound spent at a local company can work its way through many Scottish hands. That local company pays its local suppliers, contractors and employees, and that money is spent again at other local companies who in turn spend the money yet again with their local suppliers, contractors and employees, and so on and so on. This is vital because when money flows into and is kept in an area, whether through good jobs, local business growth or profits being reinvested locally, new opportunities are created and more wealth is retained. This rewires the economy to deliver prosperity across economic, social and environmental dimensions. And key to making this work are anchor organisations and local businesses. Anchor organisations such as local authorities, the NHS, universities and enterprise agencies get the ball rolling by spending money in that local economy. The next link are Scotland's small businesses, which are the backbone of local economies. They are the ones that can expand this wealth to create local jobs, support community life and reinvest locally. However, this virtuous circle is currently struggling to cycle as nearly 3/4 of small businesses who bid for public contracts find the process complex and challenging. So change is needed, and this bill is a significant step forward to ensure the consistent implementation of the community wealth building model of economic development across Scotland. It places duties on Scottish ministers and various public sector bodies to work collectively and use the economic levers at their disposal to create meaningful local action. The bill will harness their impact by leveraging their spending power through procurement and their role as an employer to help create jobs, reduce supply chains and strengthen local and regional economies. However, it will be vital to keep local small business at the heart of the process, and we need to ensure that the vital economic leverage of our anchor organisations truly benefits the small and micro enterprises that employ more than 900,000 people in Scotland. I support the bill and I'll vote for it today. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Maurice Golden to be followed by Willie Coffey, around 4 minutes. Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Let me begin by joining colleagues and the committee in supporting the general principles behind this bill. We all want to see the regeneration of our local economies, creating new wealth and, crucially, keeping it within the communities we represent.
Over the years, we've seen legislation that aligns with the pillars of community wealth building, the 2014 Procurement Reform Act, the more recent National Planning Framework 4 and the 2022 National Strategy for Economic Transformation, which identified community wealth building as a key equality policy. There are concerns to be made of individual measures, but it's important to recognise that the Scottish Government has shown a commitment to the underlying principle. That gives me hope that ministers will be open to strengthening the bill at stage 2 and beyond to ensure it actually delivers tangible economic benefit. And it does need strengthening. The committee makes the point that both communities and councils must be empowered if this is to succeed. Around 2/3 of local authorities already have or are developing community wealth building plans. That is encouraging. But councils are also being asked to deliver more with fewer and fewer resources. So it's concerning that the financial memorandum reflects only the cost of developing plans, not implementing them. Without proper resourcing, the risk is obvious. These plans become box-ticking exercises rather than engines of local economic change. But this is not just about new money. The bill also fails to make the best use of the money we already spend, particularly the vast sums in public procurement. Imagine the impact if more of that spending was directed towards small and medium-sized enterprises and indeed micro-businesses, the backbone of our local economies. That is why the Federation of Small Businesses has proposed setting local spending targets, and I think these proposals should be taken seriously. Some may question putting targets in law, but without hard targets, change simply does not happen. I have long called... Happy to.
Minister.
Explore where it is on targets, because we've had Murdo Fraser ask for targets, and I asked him where they should be set, and he said not top down. We've had Jamie Green calling for statutory targets, which presumes that they're set top down. Where does the member think these targets are set, and if they're not top down, would they be statutory, and if so, how would that work, and what is the role of government in that to set those targets or not?
Maurice Golden will give you the time back.
To use a Scottish Government phrase, it's got to be a process of co-design with our local authorities, Minister. But in all seriousness, I think a top-down approach in this, I'm looking at the Deputy Presiding Officer hailing from Orkney, and you can imagine a top-down approach may be very difficult for our island communities, to give just one example. But with the bill in general, there's an opportunity to deliver more for the SMEs and indeed develop sustainable local solutions that keep wealth circulating in communities. But we could go further. Target support for materials could create ripple effects across multiple sectors. Take textiles, for example. Supporting farmers to grow native fibres, such as nettles, would in turn support rural manufacturers, retailers and service providers. I am afraid I don't have the time to fully explain that point, but I do want to be clear that in this bill we have an opportunity to build new wealth for our communities. I hope the Government will work constructively with members and outside stakeholders to strengthen the bill to ensure that actually happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Golden. I now call Willie Coffey to be followed by Katie Clark. Around 4 minutes, Mr Coffey.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Firstly, thanks to Richard Leonard for mentioning the Finnick Weavers, who in 1761 established the world's first co-op, so thanks very much for that, Richard. The rest of your speech, though, I did wonder if I'd wandered into the wrong debate, but I did enjoy it, nevertheless. Presiding Officer, the Community Wealth Building Bill must be one of the shortest bills I've seen during my term in Parliament. All in, the content is only around 7 pages, so it was a bit of a surprise that our Economy Committee managed to write 53 pages about it. The aim of the bill is fairly straightforward: to require all of our councils and relevant public bodies to prepare and publish a community wealth building action plan and to implement them. Simple enough, and some of the members on our committee did ask why we need such a thing to be put in place in a bill. It's already happening in some authorities, as members reminded us, and there's some great work already going on in the pilot areas and others. But the short answer, I think, is to ensure that all the councils actually do it, because we know that some of them don't. It also allows us to bring a consistency of approach to embed the principles of community wealth building across the whole of Scotland. Now, have I been lucky enough, if that's the word, to have lived through the historic attempts at this in my own council many years ago? The work I see going on now seems to me to be the right approach, and it makes it work. I well remember huge community planning partnership meetings packed with officials, stakeholders and councillors, and the poor community groups sitting by the side waiting patiently for their turn to speak, hoping some progress would be made for them. That didn't work, in my view. It was too big, too overarching, and it wasn't really localised. It was all top-down driven, and we've mentioned that top-down approach a few times this afternoon already. In contrast, what I see now does work. I've seen it in North Ayrshire and I've seen it in East Ayrshire. Small local groups coming forward, dedicated and talented officials working with local people to help them progress their vision and not driving it from the top down. And for me, Presiding Officer, this is absolutely the key to this succeeding. When you've got that in place, the community groups see it, they see it working, and more of them come forward to participate. Now, I've been fortunate to have visited some communities with both the Local Government Committee and the Economy Committee colleagues to see and hear for ourselves some of the work going on. With the Local Government Committee, we visited Millport and Cumbria to see some amazing work going on there to restore the old town hall, and I visited that again in their open day just a few weeks ago. With some local, we also saw some local projects to establish a small gin distillery in the town and a new camping business too. And then with the Economy Committee in Irvine that was mentioned, I think, by the convener online, we heard from local people in our Drossens Community Development Trust who were doing some great work on regenerating the promenade, introducing things like accessible deck chairs for the community and building inclusive play parks. Now, just down the road in my own area in East Ayrshire, there are a number of projects underway that fit in with the community wealth building approach, backed up with £3 million worth of investment to help the work along. One such example is the Net Zero Accelerator, which supports local businesses to cut their energy costs and reduce emissions. That particular project has been recognised nationally and has received an award at COSLA's Excellence Awards. I think to date it has already supported 50 businesses to reduce over 14,000 tonnes of CO2, while also creating over 100 jobs and at the same time unlocking around £37 million in contract value for participating firms. It's a real green dividend that is paying off locally. Now, all of these examples, Presiding Officer, are working under the umbrella of community wealth building. They work because they're being driven by local people and very ably supported by officials who know who care about and support their communities. Presiding Officer, the bill is really as short as I said at the beginning, but sometimes the smallest things can make the biggest difference. I would urge all the colleagues in the Parliament to get behind the bill at stage 1 and give all of our communities across Scotland a chance to participate in this exciting work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Coffey. And I call Katie Clark to be followed by Michelle Thompson. Around 4 minutes, Ms Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the political support the Scottish Government gives to community wealth building in this bill. Community wealth building offers an economic approach which can help local economies create well-paid, secure jobs, promote fair work principles and meet the needs of local communities. And I wish to pay tribute to Councillor Joe Cullinane and the then Labour administration in North Ayrshire for their pioneering work on community wealth building. As the first council in Scotland to launch a community wealth building strategy, North Ayrshire rejected the failed economic model, which has increased inequality, hoarded wealth in the hands of a few and hollowed out public services. Instead, North Ayrshire's community wealth building strategy prioritised a different approach which used the council's economic levers for the benefit of local people. North Ayrshire used its existing levers like procurement, local spend, land and assets to deliver on community wealth building. The Council also brought together various local bodies like NHS, Ayrshire and Arran and Ayrshire College to help make community wealth building a success. And it's clear that community wealth building has been a success in North Ayrshire. I could list many examples, but let me give a few. The amount spent by the Council with local businesses now stands at 26% of North Ayrshire's total procurement spend. The Council's community benefits wish list has ensured that public sector contractors deliver on the needs of local communities, like the transformation of a former armoury barracks into a thriving community centre in Bar Mill. The Skills for Life vocational programme for parents delivered over 130 placements for the Council and 45 with wider public and third sector organisations between 2017 and 2022. The development of a former steelworks site into the Lockshore Park Hub and support for the construction of 3 solar farms to meet local energy needs. And the transition of Kilwinning-based shuttle buses to employee ownership, empowering all 70 members of staff in the process. So North Ayrshire demonstrates that community wealth building can be successful, which is why I think it's important that we get this bill right. Yet, as the bill stands, it is lacking both in ambition and in scope. So I agree with the points made by Richard Leonard and by Lorna Slater, and I also agree by the points made from various political parties, by Kevin Stewart, Maurice Golden and Jamie Green, that we need to seriously look at procurement and indeed local spending. This bill provides a framework which requires ministers to publish a statement, but there's no detail on what that statement should entail in terms of resourcing and other support from the Scottish Government to make community wealth building a reality. And although the bill requires local authorities and relevant public bodies to publish bill action plans, there are no specific requirements in the bill on what should be included in those plans. So I reiterate the point that's been made, that without proper resourcing and support from the Scottish Government and no clear action plan requirements, the concern is that community wealth building will be implemented in an inconsistent way across the country. The bill also fails to deliver further economic powers and levers for local authorities to ensure ambitious and wide-reaching community wealth building approaches. So I hope that the Minister will reflect on the issues that have been raised in this debate, and we can be more ambitious with a clearer bill at stage 2, which can deliver community wealth building for communities across Scotland.
Thank you, Ms Clark. And I call Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too agree with the overall finding of the Economy and Fair Work Committee that welcomes what this bill could do, but it can probably only be considered a cautious welcome. Notwithstanding the reply from the Minister a short while ago, there's considerable mileage between could and will, and especially when one considers the finance pillar, so I'll limit most of my comments to that. Now, it's worth quoting the wording: ensuring that flows of investment and financial institutions work for local people, communities and businesses. And I thought, upon rereading the Phase 1 report and reading the replies today from the Minister, that perhaps not enough consideration has been given to financial institutions. Of course, consideration has been given to public sector bodies and their role in directing funding, but the private sector, still a vital lifeline for access to finance, should also be considered in considerations going forward. The traditional high street banks typically allocate a very small fraction of their lending to social enterprise, and that means they need to rely on specialist lenders, but more frequently on their own retained earnings, grants and impact and investment. And as the FSB noted, and the Minister will know himself, access to finance is still a critical issue, particularly for SMEs. Much more thinking also needs to be done to consider how local authority pension schemes might be used. As the Minister knows, there are specific considerations around this in Scotland. There's no specific pooling policy, for example, as there is in England and Wales. And the local investment guidance given by the Scottish Government indicates interest in scaling up local projects, but without some kind of statutory guidance, I don't think we'll see movement, especially when you consider risk-return criteria, which are vitally important for these pension schemes. The use of credit unions for funding is still problematic and will continue to be, given their lack of experience and bandwidth. And to be honest, I don't see this changing. The committee report did seek further guidance on the role of local authority pension schemes, credit unions, community bonds, such as the current pilot by South Lanarkshire Council, matching citizens' investments and guaranteeing projects, or share issues. And to add to this, I'd add employee buyouts. So it'd be useful to hear some further reflection on how the Minister might approach all of these areas in his closing remarks today. And I note the comments by Willie Coffey and what's happening in his area. The comments from COSLA that it could run the risk of becoming a tick-box exercise, I have a great deal of sympathy with, and I echo the sentiment of members thus far that this bill has some way to go before it can have a real impact. COSLA also made an excellent point about the culture change required to fully embed wealth building. A change in culture is very complex, difficult to achieve, and to be honest, I just don't see the recognition of this in any of the statements from the government thus far, because that's a bold change, culture change. Finally, I'm going to reiterate the need for disaggregated data collection for women-led businesses, and I'm disappointed that the Scottish Government is not doing more to mandate data collection in this regard. And the Minister noted that Accelerate Her, sponsored by myself, is in the Parliament this week, and they fundamentally aim to close the investment gap for women founders and help them scale their businesses. But if we do not collect the data, we cannot make a change. So again, I would urge the Minister to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Thompson. We will now move to closing speeches, and I call Lawrence Slater to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This bill needs to ensure that the people of Scotland have a genuine say in how their communities develop and how they face the future. What kind of town do they want to live in? What kind of spaces would they like to meet their neighbours in? What kind of and how much renewable energy infrastructure are they willing to host? I am likely to bring a number of amendments to this bill in the interest of trying to get the bill to take us further down the road towards genuine wealth building across Scotland, to ensure that more people have a share in Scotland's economic success. This has to be about more than good intentions. It needs to have measurable outcomes, which brings me to my first question about the stated purpose of the bill, which is, excellently, to reduce economic and wealth inequality between individuals and communities in and across Scotland, and closes with, by facilitating and supporting the generation, circulation and retention of wealth in local and regional economies. But in the middle is this question about support economic growth in and across Scotland. Now, the usual measure of economic growth is GDP, and every single witness that we had at the EFW committee said that GDP was not a good way to measure success in community wealth building. So I would ask the Scottish Government to reconsider this published intention of the bill and make it clear what outcome they are trying to achieve and how they would measure success and progress. As others have suggested in this debate, there is a need to agree on data collection and standards, metrics and targets. We need to understand where we are, where we're going, and we will need to see how effective these action plans are. I can suggest to the Minister that the approach taken in the Circular Economy Bill to co-design standards and targets may provide a process for him. I would like to see the bill mandate the creation of targets for things like the creation of a certain percentage of cooperative businesses in a region, a percentage of local authority money spent on local procurement. It is very important that the development of community wealth action plans include community trusts and existing democratic development organisations where these exist, because they are the ones who are already doing this and have the local knowledge and experience. I would like to see energy called out explicitly in the bill. The generation of affordable renewable energy is something everyone in Scotland should have a stake in and benefit from. Certainly those whose communities host renewable infrastructure. They should absolutely get material benefit from doing this. Another area that I'm looking at is around the creation and retention of community assets and how we support the transfer of unwanted public assets to communities to use for the public good. I'm interested, for example, in the status of local authorities' common good registers. These need to be kept up to date. Are they up to date? Are the things on those registers actually being used for the common good? Can we add more things to those registers? This bill at stage 1 legislates for two things only. One is to mandate that the Scottish Government create a community wealth building strategy. Not incidentally that they then have to follow it, but we'll come to that. The other is to mandate that certain public bodies get around the table with local authorities and come up with community wealth action plans. Neither of these are bad ideas, and I look forward to working with you all at stages 2 and 3 of this bill to make them better.
Thank you, Ms Slater. And I call on Richard Leonard to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Around 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. For me, it is simple. We should have local economies where far more power rests in the hands of local workers and of local communities, not left in the hands of absentee directors in faraway boardrooms. We should have a redistribution of wealth and power. We should have a democratic alternative to extractive capital, to neoliberal economics. Because we have seen over the last decade and a half just how badly exposed to economic shocks we are. In the end, this is about political will and political priorities. Because by offering people hope out of despair, by offering a democratic renewal in the economy in place of widespread discontent, we would be offering people an alternative to the politics of division and of the authoritarian right. There are some self-evident, conspicuous holes in the bill. What about supporting credit unions, some of whom the Minister for Business and Employment and I met with just yesterday when they were lobbying Parliament? What about legislating to empower municipal, community and cooperative ownership of energy, as Lorna Slater said? What about our local government pension schemes, worth £60 billion? Aren't they relevant public bodies? The Strathclyde pension scheme alone is valued at £28 billion, yet little of that is reinvested in the local economy, and even when it is usually through financing vehicles which are themselves absentee multinational corporations or venture capitalists. And what about the Scottish National Investment Bank? Shouldn't this public bank have a statutory duty to support democratic forms of ownership in our economy? So what I am talking about is community wealth building from the root up, a mosaic, not a monolith, not a command economy, but one decentralised and socially owned. I'm talking about a democratic socialism which embraces municipal ownership and cooperative ownership, worker participation, worker ownership and control. And I am bound to say that what this bill illustrates is the insufficiency of nationalism and an SNP government that has abandoned long ago its radicalism. The bill should be a new path to those old ideals of cooperation, of solidarity, of democratic reform, of peace and prosperity, founded on principles which are rooted in a collective view of society. Many of us in the Labour Party come from a radical, a democratic, a socialist tradition, which finds its contemporary form in a community wealth-building movement. It is of no surprise to me that two of its outstanding leaders, Matthew Brown in Preston and Joe Cullinane in North Ayrshire, who Katie Clark spoke of, are and have been Labour Party municipal socialists. Because the Labour Party should never be about the promotion of market forces and excessive wealth accumulation. It should always be about people before profit, the more equal society. That is who we are and who we always should be. What we are witnessing with this bill is not just shallowness, moderation or timidity. What we are witnessing is an abject abdication of responsibility. The Scottish Government promised to bring forward a Community Wealth Building Act, I quote, to redirect wealth, control and community benefits to local economies. It's my fear that this bill in its current form will do little to even measure that. It will do nothing whatsoever to drive it. This bill does not rewire the economy, a property which Kevin Stewart claimed of it. If the government wills an end, the government must also will the means to it, a point which both Katie Clark and Maurice Golden made in the debate. So we will vote for the bill in principle. We will seek to amend it. We will seek to cooperate with the government in that task, because in the end it is in all of our interests to make this a Community Wealth Building Act worthy of the name.
Thank you, Mr Leonard. I now call on Stephen Kerr to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Around 6 minutes,
thank you, Presiding Officer. It's always interesting to know which Labour Party will turn up for a debate. And I think we very clearly can see which Labour Party has turned up today. And for all the years I've known Richard Leonard, I do salute his steadfast commitment to those socialist principles of overturning the bourgeoisie and establishing a People's Republic. But let me begin with this. The Scottish... Indeed, don't encourage him, please. The Scottish Conservatives do not disagree with the ambition that ministers claim lies behind community wealth building. Stronger local economies, vibrant high streets, genuinely resilient communities are aspirations that we should all support. Our disagreement is not about the principle, it's about the method. And the method set out in this bill is flawed, limited in ambition and weighed down by bureaucracy. Presiding Officer, when I listen to the government speeches generally, and indeed certainly to the Labour Party speeches from the leftist parties in this place on community wealth building, what strikes me most is the astonishing lack of scale and vision, and in some cases a connection to reality. Too often we hear community wealth building spoken about as if a handful of small contracts awarded to a handful of small organisations represents some great leap forward in economic transformation. It is nothing less than box ticking. It's small ball economics. It's hardly a strategy for rebuilding Scotland's prosperity. Now, community cafes, volunteer-led woodlands, social enterprises are all valuable contributions to civic life, but they should not be the ceiling of our ambition. Scotland cannot content itself with a narrow circular economy of micro-contracts passed around a small number of actors. We must be bolder than that. We must harness the full entrepreneurial spirit of the Scottish people if we are to build a genuine national wealth and community wealth. And that's why the 5 pillars do matter, not as slogans, but as levers for a genuinely ambitious economic strategy. And there's been a lot said about procurement. Anchor institutions can and should be playing an important part in reshaping the Scottish economy at its foundations, supporting productivity, capability and scale, not simply rewriting procurement guidance. Procurement should be strategic and not performative. Unemployment. Better jobs come from investment, innovation and productivity, not from state mandates or new duties. Growth improves wages. You can't tax your way to growth, Richard Leonard. Bureaucracy depresses them. On land and property, the Scottish state, the largest landowner in the nation, is sitting on unproductive assets. If ministers were serious, they should release land for productive use by those who can create jobs, investment and prosperity. Instead, we get more frameworks. On ownership, cooperatives and social enterprises have a role, but they are not inherently superior to private enterprise. The government's ideological tilt risks distorting procurement and squeezing out the very businesses that drive Scotland's tax base and innovation. On finance, We should be unlocking real investment, modernising pension structures, empowering, yes, local financial institutions like credit unions, and supporting capital formation across Scotland. But none of that requires this bill. The government has the power now to do these things. And that, presiding officer, is the problem. This bill does not do the things that genuinely build wealth. Instead, it does what this government so often does. It creates new duties, new partnerships, new statements, new plans, new reporting cycles, new ministerial powers. It centralises and it prescribes. It expands ministerial discretion while offloading obligations onto public bodies that are already stretched to breaking point. The bill demands action plans, but with no obligation to demonstrate results. No requirement to show improvements in productivity, business growth, wages or investment. Compliance is measured in paperwork, not outcomes. And Scotland's had enough of government by process. Local authorities, health boards, colleges, enterprise agencies all warned the committee of these substantial new burdens. And yet the financial memorandum claims the cost will be minimal. It's simply not credible. Obligations without resources, responsibilities without clarity, expectations without realism. And let me say this plainly. This bill hands ministers sweeping powers to issue binding guidance, revise national statements at will, and add public bodies to the statutory regime with limited scrutiny. That is not decentralisation. That is expansion of state power through the back door. If we have real ambition, if we have real vision, Scotland can be a genuine leader in community wealth building. Not the limited bureaucratic version set out in this bill, but a model that unleashes the full entrepreneurial capacity of the Scottish people. The framework before us contains elements we can support, and that's why we will be voting for it at stage one. But let's be honest, as drafted, it's far too narrow, far too process-driven and far too centralised to deliver the transformation ministers claim. In conclusion, real community wealth is not created by another statutory plan, another set of ministerial powers. And I think the Minister knows this. It's created by investment, enterprise, the productive use of land, competitive procurement, and the hard graft of growing businesses. It is created when government steps back from ideology and steps up to support innovation, skills and local success. Only when we couple the principles of community wealth building with the natural entrepreneurship of the Scottish people will we see gains in productivity, investment and prosperity that Scotland urgently needs. Presiding officer, that is the challenge before the government as we move to the next stage. And if ministers meet that challenge, then this Parliament can turn an underpowered framework into something worthy of Scotland's potential.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. And I now call on Minister Ivan McKee to wind up the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please, or around 7 minutes.
That's great. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thank you to all the members that contributed to this wide-ranging debate, although I suppose not totally unexpected, the various twists and turns that it took over the last hour or so. I'd like to start by reflecting on some of the comments that Daniel Johnson made from the committee's consideration. And the first question, is the bill necessary? And that was indeed the very first question I asked officials when I took over responsibility for the bill earlier last year. I think he answered that question quite effectively by being clear that what it does do is provide that clear obligation to act. And I think it's important that we look at this bill as being a step in that process. I think everybody has recognised, or many have recognised, the significant work that has already happened over a long period of time in the process of building community wealth and the mechanisms that go around that. Be that what we've done on procurement, and I'll come back to that, be that what's happened on community asset transfers, be that across a whole range of support and interventions that the government Government has provided over a long period of time. And it's a step on that journey as we move forward to cement and embed community wealth building across communities across Scotland, and providing that platform, that standard, that requirement for local authorities and their partners to step up to, I think is the next step on that journey. And I think some of the members, Willie Coffey and others included, recognise that that is exactly what this is. It's absolutely true to say that the guidance will contain a lot of the answers to many of the issues that have been raised today, and I've been very clear we need to move forward and pull together that draft guidance at an early stage in terms of the contents that will be within that, because that will lay out what the expectation is for the work that local authorities and their partners will be expected to provide as part of this process, and set those expectations, we think, is and that floor, which I think is really an important part of this process. That will include evaluation mechanisms, which has been rightly mentioned. It was mentioned on committee, and also how the wider business, community, third sector, community groups and others should be involved in this process, and certainly the requirement to consult on them is something that's obviously central to this approach. There's been much talk about targets and obviously some backward and forward on that. And just to be clear, I think it's, the Government sees that locally set targets can be a very important part of this process in taking forward community wealth building at a local level. But I think everyone's agreed that government setting those targets clearly is not the right approach. So when we talk about statutory targets, members need to be careful about what exactly it is they're asking for. We will be taking forward in guidance included in that requirement for local authorities to be able to put those targets together and setting that requirement. But again, statutory setting of numbers by central government, I don't think is something that anyone wants to see.
Stephen Kerr.
Intervention. I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. Does he accept, in fact, I think that most of the members that commented on statutory setting of targets was not specific numbers. It was the idea that we need to have some measurable outputs, because currently there isn't anything in the bill that comes anywhere near a measurable output. Minister.
No, absolutely accept that. And it's something we talked about in committee. It's something I've talked with stakeholders on. And an important point is to design that in a way so that it gives scope for local authorities and their partners to be able to set those targets locally. But the members are clear that requirement can be set, but the targets themselves need to be set locally. I want to touch on the issue of procurement, because a number of members have raised that, and I think no one works, I would like to think, harder than me in engaging with local businesses. And just this week I've been engaged with more local businesses, Scottish start-ups, and working with them to get them plugged into procurement across the Scottish public sector. And the procurement team that works tirelessly on this recognise that the £16 billion that's spent across Scotland's economy by public sector organisations is a huge engine for growth, a point that I make repeatedly at all the engagement I have in this space. However, I do absolutely recognise that there is more work to do. There are more opportunities to be opened up. There are more mechanisms to be created to streamline those processes. That is something we continue to work tirelessly on. But I would just ask that members reflect on the fact, the progress that has been made, the fact that south of the border 20% is the amount of public procurement that is spent with small and medium-sized enterprises. That has been built up to a level more than double that, at 47% in the Scottish public sector. I think something we should be proud of, while recognising there is further to go. And it was interesting to listen to Katie Clark reflecting on the wonderful work in North Ayrshire. And I had the pleasure of visiting the Loch Shore initiative recently and seeing some great work that's going on there. But that 26% held up as a fabulous local achievement, which absolutely is, versus the 47% that's been achieved in the context of the reported data across the whole of Scotland. We need to recognise that. Members have mentioned CPO and CSO, and again, this is work that members should know has been taken forward. There's a consultation out just now on this. Some great work been done by Rosanna Cunningham and an expert group on this, and the Government will be bringing proposals forward on that following that consultation, both in terms of how we modernise CPO and make it even more effective, effective, and the introduction of compulsory sales orders being considered as part of that process. So that work is absolutely underway. And likewise on procurement, there have been calls from some quarters for setting up thresholds, changing the thresholds on procurement, and it was mentioned by some members already this afternoon. Members should be aware that we already have a consultation out on that. That process doesn't need legislation to change those thresholds. The quickest way to do them is through the process we've taken forward through that consultation, and then changing the thresholds rather than putting them into this piece of legislation. Some of the interventions I thought were very effective in focusing on what's already happening locally. Already mentioned both Willie Coffey and Katie Clark, highlighting some great examples, which I just think points to the fact that community wealth building isn't something new. It's something that's been embedded in many parts of the country, and great work has been taken forward. And what this bill is to give us that structure and that framework, and is minimising the bureaucracy involved. And members know that nobody's more focused on minimising bureaucracy than me in this regard, making it as streamlined as possible, but providing that focus, that requirement, that framework for all parts of Scotland to move up to the level of the best examples that have been identified. And of course, this isn't the end of the journey. There is much more beyond that we can continue to do to deliver on the objectives of this bill, which is to ensure that the public spend, the fair work agenda, the management and control of assets, community ownership, supported businesses and other types of ownership that we all want to see more of are supported right across the country. And I look forward to working with members as we take this bill forward over the coming weeks and months to deliver the next stage in that journey towards more thoroughly embedding community wealth building in support of growing Scotland's economy. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate on Community Wealth Building Scotland Bill at Stage 1. And it's now time to move on to the next item of business. The next item of business is consideration of motion 18938 in the name of Shona Robertson on a financial resolution for the Community Wealth Building Scotland Bill at Stage 1. I call on Minister Ivan McKay to move the motion.
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. The question on this motion will in fact be put at decision time, and there will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.